Letters, waiting. War is often remembered through armies, weapons, and strategy. Yet one of its most powerful forces did not march, fire, or command. It traveled quietly in envelopes and paper, carried through mud, seas, mountains, and broken roads. It arrived in trenches, hospitals, barracks, and kitchens back home. It existed in handwriting, smudges of dirt, careful sentences, crossed-out words, and thoughts written in moments of exhaustion or hope. This was the world of letters, the fragile thread that connected people separated by distance, fear, and uncertainty during the First World War. The Great War was fought with rifles and artillery, but it was endured through waiting, longing, and the constant exchange of messages between the front and the home. Letters became bridges between lives that could no longer exist in the same place. They were promises, confessions, reassurances, and sometimes silent acknowledgments of things too painful to write. This is the story of the war, made of ink, the emotional landscape that shaped how millions survived separation. The first letters sent. When the war began, people wrote to preserve normality. Soldiers described early marches, uniforms, and training camps. Families wrote about harvests, neighbors, small changes in weather, and everyday life. Letters tried to hold on to the world as it had been before mobilization. Paper carried stability. Ink carried routine. Even as trains filled with recruits and streets echoed with farewells, letters tried to create the illusion that distance was temporary. But as the war deepened, the tone of writing changed. Letters became shorter, more careful, more restrained. Words avoided fear while circling around it. Writers learned to say much without saying everything, to share life, but not despair, to acknowledge danger, but not burden those who waited. Between each letter lay uncertainty. Letters at the front. In trenches, letters became moments of escape. They arrived bundled in sacks, distributed along firing lines, passed from hand to hand with quiet anticipation. When a soldier received a letter, time shifted. The trench did not disappear. But for a few minutes, its meaning softened. Reading turned mud into pavement, darkness into lamplight, exhaustion into memory. Letters carried smells of home, tobacco, soap, bread, garden air. They carried voices not heard for months. Some were folded carefully and kept inside pockets, worn thin by touch. Others were read in silence and tucked away where no rain could reach them. Soldiers wrote whenever they could, leaning on sandbags, sitting on ammunition crates, resting against trench walls while distant guns echoed. They wrote with numb fingers, under flickering lantern light, on scrap paper when stationery ran out. Their handwriting shifted with fatigue, shaking slightly after long patrols, steadying when hope briefly returned. They censored themselves not because they were ordered to, though military censorship also existed, but because they wanted to protect those at home. They avoided describing terror, hunger, and fear. They replaced danger with routine, silence with reassurance. War transformed honesty into kindness. Letters at home. For those who waited, parents, wives, siblings, children, friends, letters became evidence that someone still existed in the world. Mail days shaped entire weeks. Families measured time not by calendars but by envelopes. A missing letter created worry that grew with each passing day. A delayed delivery could turn fear into restless imagination. Homes became reading rooms of emotion. Letters were unfolded carefully, read aloud at kitchen tables, passed across hands, read again in quiet rooms where tears could fall unseen. They were stored in boxes, tied with ribbon or string, kept inside drawers or beneath mattresses as tangible proof of connection. Every letter received meant breath. Every silence meant danger. Those who wrote back searched for balance, to give comfort without pretending life was unchanged, to share domestic details without reminding the absent of what they had lost. Waiting became its own form of endurance. Censorship and unspoken truth. The war introduced official censorship that shaped every letter exchanged. Passages were crossed out. Details about locations, operations, or losses were removed. Writers learned to avoid specifics. Sentences tilted toward ambiguity. Yet even censored, letters carried truth between the lines. Recipients learned to read pauses, tone shifts, and missing details. A sentence too carefully written could say more than any explicit description. Emotion traveled where information could not. Letters became conversations hidden inside restraint. Letters that never arrived. Not every letter completed its journey. Some were lost at sea when ships sank. Others vanished in destroyed postal depots or along rail lines struck by artillery. Some remained sealed in pockets that never returned home, discovered later among personal effects. The absence of a letter could be more devastating than grim news. Families learned to recognize official telegrams as objects of dread. Where letters brought life, telegrams brought finality. Brief statements that ended hope in a single line. Silence sometimes hurt more than words. Hospital letters and quiet resilience. Wounded soldiers wrote from hospital beds, their handwriting clumsy under bandages, their sentences slowed by pain. Nurses often helped write for those who could not lift a pen. These letters were gentler, slower, filled with careful optimism. They described recovery where fear might have been more truthful. Hospitals generated letters that mixed gratitude, fragility, and unspoken grief. Messages written between uncertainty and survival. Love, distance, and emotional survival. The war also produced letters of affection, promises across oceans, confessions sent too late, vows made in ink because speech was no longer possible. Love letters became lifelines, binding lives interrupted by distance. They carried hope that stretched beyond uncertainty, imagining futures despite the present. They were not merely personal. They were acts of resistance against despair. The end of war, and the letters that remained. When the armistice came, letters did not stop. They shifted from longing to reunion, from uncertainty to fragile relief. Soldiers wrote from trains, ships, and demobilization camps. Families wrote instructions for travel home, questions about arrival, planning conversations that could not yet be spoken face to face. Many letters were never answered. Some recipients did not return. Others returned changed, making previous letters painful reminders of who they once were. Boxes of wartime correspondence remained in attics, drawers, and trunks, preserved as archives of emotion. They contained voices that never fully returned to speech. The war ended on paper, but letters kept its memory alive. Legacy of the War of Ink. The First World War changed communication forever. It revealed the emotional power of written connection, the psychological importance of correspondence, the fragility and endurance of human bonds under strain. Letters taught the world that survival was not only physical, it was emotional. They preserved hope when nothing else could travel across the distance between front and home. The war produced destruction, but it also produced millions of pages of humanity. Lines of ink that carried memory across time. And long after the guns fell silent, the letters remained,